You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
You know, people talk about your last meal, right? What if you had one last game of Flesh and Blood Classic Constructed to play? What matchup would you choose to play? And what side of the matchup are you on?
So, for everyone listening, Hayden did not prep me with this question and has asked me with it without any preparation. But it would be my 10th round Indianapolis against David Rude, former Magic the Gathering Pro Tour champion, where I drop an Arclight Sentinel after sitting on it for most of the game, knowing that Pulverize is his only way out, and he doesn't blink me. That'd be my last game of Flesh and Blood.
Just a replay of one specific game. I was more thinking maybe a particular matchup. Like in my head, I had I'd love to play one more Rhino versus Bravo, one more Viscerai versus Ultim, but that's
certainly Kano or something. But that's just it's so funny because as soon as you ask that question, I just go right back to that scenario. I'm like, just where that blink doesn't hit the battlefield. No, that was a great match. It'd be Kano or something. Kano is the deck that I truly enjoy playing in Flesh and Blood, to be honest.
Should have played Worlds then.
Yeah, I should have played Worlds so I could play against... Well, I couldn't have played against Prism, which would have been nice. What would I have paired into? At least I would have probably helped you guys out with your
5 Icelander mirrors. 5 Icelander
like that. Yeah. I'll take that over Prism any day of the week, to be honest, on Kano.
I think my win rate against Prism was better than my win rate against Icelander, PT1 versus Worlds. But yeah. Brendan, episode 85 of Arsenal Pass. Here we are, Dynasty and Constructed. Part 2. Last week we covered 4 classes. We ran a bit short on time, so we are going to basically jump straight into covering the last 6 classes. And there's a lot to discuss, I think, in Dynasty. We've now seen one event happen with Dynasty and Classic Constructed, and this weekend we've got Battle Hardened Hong Kong coming up, and we do also have Singapore Battle Hardened before the end of the year, and then before we even get to the ProQuest season, we do have one more Battle Hardened. So, want to ask you though, how was your week in Flesh and Blood? Have you been playing any Flesh and Blood? Is this downtime for Brendan right now?
No, it hasn't been downtime because we've been filming our video series for Legend Story Studios, which was fun. There's a lot of sleeving to do, which is notoriously just that is a task for me. Just the way my cards are, there's a balance between, and this is, I know that I'm sort of diverting here, but there's a balance between organized and too organized, and I think I fall into too organized to where, it's just a pain in the butt to sleeve those decks. We played 4 decks, 4 cool decks. The budget, I actually enjoyed the budget matches the most.
Me too.
Maybe because of the results. I don't know, but I thought it was really cool to sort of branch out and play some classes I hadn't played in Blitz. Blitz is a format, particularly where I am a lot more narrow, right? In Class Constructed, pretty much played everything. Just that's how testing sort of works. But in Blitz, I tend to just play I tend to have just played what I liked and what was powerful. So it was cool to really branch out and check out some of the new Dynasty cards. So it's actually been a lot of Flesh and Blood, to be honest. You and I have been recording a lot. We've been talking about it a lot. So not a break, but when it comes to armories and maybe thinking about like the next big professional event or something like that. Mentally, I've been on a little bit of break, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel the same. I expected to take the kind of next 4 to 6 weeks pretty light. And we were approached by LSS and fabtcg.com website to do some gameplay videos for Blitz, effectively. We're heading to, I think Skirmish season is happening post the ProQuest season. But, there is this downtime and LSS are really keen to have some content with new Dynasty cards, and obviously there's Classic Constructed events happening around the world over the next 2 to 3 months, so time to shine a bit of a spotlight on Blitz. And we got to play some stuff that we normally wouldn't play. So round 1 is up on the Fab TCG YouTube channel or over up on fabtcg.com. There's the article with our deck list there. There is also by the time this pod goes up, there is also a deck tech that both me and Brendan covering the decks that we played. And we played I played Azalea, Brendan played Katsu in the first round. And it was cool. I really enjoyed it. And the second round is up now as well. I think by the time this pod drops, about the same time. And that is, what did we play in round 2, Brendan? You were on Icelander and I was on Dorinthia. A pretty cool Dorinthia build. Dual wielding Dorinthia.
Yeah, the Icelander deck was the Icelander deck does. This is a budget Icelander deck, so
budget.
Yeah, not surprisingly, the Icelander deck doesn't need too much support from L's and F's, so it was a pretty strong deck that I ran into a Dorinthia deck there.
But yeah, we won't spoil the result. Yeah, my last week in Flesh and Blood, I mean, similar to you, I think this has been a big part of the last week is playing these Blitz games, trying out the decks. I went and played an Armory this week, which was cool. I haven't played an Armory. I looked at my, you can see your, what is it, like your fabtcg.com profile, and you can see your events you've played.
Yeah.
And for me, it was literally like calling, PT, Nationals. I think I played one Armory event, Worlds, the Dev Challenge, and it was like Armory event. Like that's my page, and that's like 4 months. I have not played many in-person events and Armory, so it was really cool to get back to an Armory last week, and I'm hoping to play a couple more between the sort of the downtime period heading into. Spoiler, we're about to talk it in the news section, but PT1 sounds like it is in North America. So if it is in North America, Brendan, I will be at PT1 2023.
I just have a funny anecdote about the whole professional players playing events or like armories and things like that. So basically, when I was casting the World Championships, the first match, we go to sort of this player profile, and I think it was Vietfam. I could be wrong, but he's like ranked whatever on ELO, like quite high, and then you go to XP, and it was like a very high XP. I'm like, this is what we're talking about, right? Like the people that are at the top tables of Flesh and Blood, they're playing all the time, you're accruing XP, nose to the grindstone, and then the next profile is Michael Hamilton, and the XP rank is like 18,534. Like just hasn't played a single army, and I was like, well, yeah, it's just like, but yeah, I feel you. I've been taking a break from armories, but I am going to play ProQuest season pretty extensively.
Yeah, I heard you said that to me the other day. I mean, it's a tighter ProQuest season, so I mean, let's just jump straight into the news because we are going to cover all these facts. But PT1 is apparently going to be in 2023, PT1 has now been confirmed by LSS to be in North America. That's all we know right now, though. And the ProQuest season does run. I actually just closed the tab like an idiot, but the ProQuest season does run from January 15th to the end of January. So it's a three-week period. I think it's I want to say 14th, 21st, 28th. Yeah, so those weekends is the ProQuest season. So a safe bet is probably somewhere around March, April time. We're going to see PT1 for 2023. If it's later, I'd be really surprised, but. It could happen. Along with that as well, so ProQuest season, like you say, Brendan, you're going to be playing those ProQuests. You can go to fabtcg.com and find where these ProQuests are up. They should all be up now on the website. Stores, I think, have had to submit. They generally have to submit before the announcement happens of the actual official announcement ProQuest season. There's always this weird thing where it comes up on the retailer page. So everyone knows about it, but it's not officially announced until all the stores lock in and you get it actually up on the website. So that has happened now. You can go find those events. I'm planning to play at least one, probably two myself if I, just get some games in and play. I want to play Classic Constructed Dynasty, but we'll see how we feel once it gets to January. I'm also going to judge an event this time around, which I'm looking forward to. So, yeah, should be good. Other events coming up. So, like I said, we do have Battle Hardened Hong Kong this weekend. I don't know if there's any video coverage or anything for that. I haven't heard or seen anything. I have reached out to ask if there was. Another look at Dynasty and Class Constructed, and then Singapore is happening December 10th, another Battle Hardened, and then we have Leeds and Belgium. I think the Belgium Battle Hardened is in Antwerp, happening in January, the UK and the Belgium Battle Hardened. So a few more events as we head into this ProQuest season, and then I'm sure by the time we get to, it really sounded like, from what I heard at Worlds, that we're going to get some form of OP announcements in the next couple of weeks, like early December.
Man, I really hope so, especially when it comes to callings and international callings at that. Like, if there's another major calling in Asia, I would love to go, but I do need at least, I need more than two months notice. So I hope we get that announcement soon, and I hope we get a bit more notice than we have gotten in the past, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting you over this side of the world so we can do it on my turf, Brendan, as opposed to always in North America.
I'll take you to the best restaurant in the world, which is Pasture in New Zealand, in Auckland. It's amazing.
So you've said, but I'll take you to the best restaurant over here so we can trade. Do also want to shout out as well, metalfabtokens.com. We do have the Arsenal Pass Metal Fab token that is up. It's that cool looking resource coin. Look, there's Brendan. He's got one right there for you. Those are available on Metal Fab tokens right now. I did bust mine out at the Armory this week. Does look very cool, especially under some lights. Big shout out to all the Arsenal Pass patrons as well. Brendan, I think no Commander Cookout this week because we're going to get straight into Dynasty Review Part 2. If you do want to get your questions in, you can do arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Drop them in the YouTube comments. Let us know it's a Commander Cookout question. We do also take them in our Patreon Discord and on Twitter if you want to DM us. And you could send a postcard to Brendan if you want to. Whatever you want to do, Brendan. You want to? I'm kidding.
You could try, but you could go with the tried and true and just scream it at me at an in-person event.
Yeah, why not? Go for it. We're not one of those for a while though, so we'll have to wait. Let's get into the class that we didn't cover last week. Main topic of the pod. Dynasty and Constructed. This week we're covering Wizard, Guardians, Runeblades, Illusionists, Ninjas, and of course Assassin and Arachne. Wizard, we didn't get to talk about it last week, and I just saw you just shaking in your chair waiting to get to Wizard. So let's get straight into it and talk about talk about Kano and CC. Why not? Just put it straight into your veins, Brendan. What are your thoughts on the set for Kano and what cards are you looking at?
Well, it feels like a Kano set, to be honest. Doesn't really feel like a lot of these cards slot into the current Icelander archetype. I noticed that the most when we played the Blitz decks, my Icelander deck, it was hard to find an excuse to play a new card from Dynasty. But as Kano, you're a bit spoiled for choice, to be honest. And it does depend where you want to take the archetype. I think in the current sort of OTK and just like combo flexible archetype, right? Which is kind of what our deck was at the World Championships, right? It's a combo deck, but it's not 100% reliant on it. You did get some fantastic cards, right? You got a direct upgrade in Swell Tidings. This is basically Voltic Bolt with an on-hit trigger if it deals 5 or more damage, giving you that Ponder token, which is absolutely not nothing. You would have taken another Voltic Bolt, another 2 for 5 with no text on it any day of the week. It's a great card. On top of that, I know this isn't going to sound too exciting to all of you out there, but these 0 for 1s, 0 for 1 at blue, 0 for 2, 0 for 3, effectively just more zaps in Wizard. Very, very good. It opens up potentially more archetypes in Wizard, such as like Tempo and things like that. Basically a Wizard that's maybe blocking more, but then plays out like a 0 for 3 to take a card from the hand, try to open up windows. It's really, really exciting. So you get that in both Prognosticate and Sap. I do wish, and I have said it before, that those were any target so that we could have a bit more interaction with Dramai. But nevertheless, those 3 cards for me are the big wins and the big standouts for Wizard.
I think they'd be too good, to be honest, with Sap. I think, with Surge. Surge is such a strong keyword, I think.
Yes, you would have to change the keyword, absolutely.
Yeah, so you could have exactly. I think I do agree. I would have liked to maybe send another card that interacts with dragons, with Dramai. The cards we've seen, so you talked about Swell Tidings, obviously a Voltic Bolt sort of upgrade, basically, at red. We do also have Aether Quickening, I think is a really interesting card. It's Scalding Rain effectively with the Surge mechanic on it, and it gives Go Again. That card's really interesting to me as a way to give a non-attack Wizard card Go Again that isn't... So we've seen attack and Go Again on Wizard non-attack actions before, but they're buff effects, right? This is pure damage. We haven't really seen this. I think this opens up a lot of avenues to how you potentially build Kano. Not only that, with cards like... You talked about Swell Tidings, you talked about these effective Zap and... what's the one from Uprising that does the same thing?
Aether Dart.
Aether Dart, yeah, but that's any target. You now have effectively... You can play 12 red... 0 for 3s in your Wizard deck. There's so many new avenues for how you could take your Kano, or you could tweak current builds by replacing or adding extra copies of effective cards.
Aether Quickening is really good. And I did skip over that one because it may not slot directly into the deck. Like the combo deck, but honestly, that deck was playing Scalding Rain. So let me just paint this situation, right? Yeah. So, well, the more aggressive the format is, the more you have to combo. The more incentivized you are to play Crucible of Aetherwave instead of Waning Moon. But if you start running into Guardians that are running Oasis Respite and things like this, you might opt to play Waning Moon. And if you are playing Waning Moon, like Aether Quickening is a fantastic card because it's not unlikely that Scalding Rain Red would have made that deck made a slot in that deck, and Scalding Rain Blue absolutely. Very viable. So this card's great with Waning Moon, and I think that's like a very powerful weapon for Kano that hasn't been completely explored yet, although we did have it in our sideboard as sort of as an option to potentially play into things like Oldhim.
Yeah, the format ended up speeding up so much again, and not even speeding up, but people started cutting cards like Oasis Respite and Heart of Ice and things like that. So in my list for Worlds, I ended up cutting down to just the one Scalding Rain for Lessons in Lava target. And to be honest, I probably would have just played 0. I think it's one of the cards I would have changed in that event in particular. But throw whatever you know about Kano out the window for a second in terms of the current builds. So the build that we played at Worlds, the build we played at PT1, just throw it out for a second. Aether Wildfire combo withstanding, always a powerful option. Mm-hmm. You can play that in any Kano build. You can stick that card in. You can now start looking at options, I think, where you could be playing 22, 24 blues potentially with a Kano deck with Waning Moon and playing more on your opponent's turn as well. A higher hit rate. Okay, I draw 2 blues in this hand. I play off the top of my opponent's turn with a Waning Moon trigger, or I don't see a 2 blues in my hand. I see 1 blue, 3 reds, block out with 2 cards, play a more traditional. There's so many different ways I think you can take this Kano now with these cards. It's going to really open it up, and we haven't even talked about cards like Brainstorm, of course, and Seer Stone.
Yeah, for sure. I would say, like, for Kano, if you looked at Dynasty, you're kind of spoiled for choice at a lot of the new tools you get to work with. And Dynasty is just a net positive set for Kano. It's really, really good. Well, I shouldn't say net, because it's positive for Kano in terms of the cards you get, but some of the cards that the other classes get could negatively affect Kano, and particularly the combo Kano build, because there has been a lot of Ward introduced, as well as Spell Void, additional Spell Void founded Warrior, and of course the Runeblade Helm. So those things could affect Kano's ability to sort of be that ultra combo deck, but the more Kano switches into a mid-range or sort of tempo build, the less reliant, or the less hamstring it is by something like Spell Void, right? The more Spell Void actually just blocks 1 rather than 5 for each instance of 1. But ultimately, I think it's a great set for Wizard, and it's a great set for Kano. We did talk about this maybe not slotting perfectly into the current archetypes of Icelander, but that's just the current archetype. There's no reason why we couldn't see ourselves going back to a more spell-oriented Icelander where you could end up playing some of those cards. But Hayden, I'm gonna let you. Why don't you jump into Seer Stone for us, and maybe talk a little bit about that potential Brainstorm combo, and tell me if it's real.
Well, so Seer Stone, Brainstorm, I don't even know if you need to play Seer Stone for a Brainstorm combo. I think you could look at them somewhat in tandem. You could also look at them separately. So let's just tackle Brainstorm first, because I think it'll lead into Seer Stone. Is this Brainstorm combo real? Don't know. I saw someone playing it at the Armory I was at actually on Monday. They were playing like a turbo version. So there's 2, I think, current thoughts on how you can Brainstorm. If you are looking to build this deck potentially and look at a Brainstorm combo, there's this kind of ultra turbo where you don't stack your deck. You just play cards, like a lot of the amulets and talismans and stuff like that, and you just turbo through, and you can play it that way, draw a lot of cards, potions of luck, Hope Mentions Hood, etc. There's the other way where you can actually stack your deck with tomes and blues, and maybe you play a bit more of a traditional damage game in between, and potentially some defense reactions. You block out a bit, you chip some damage, and then you get to a point where you've stacked tome blue blue, tome blue blue, tome blue blue, and Seer Stone is probably the one that's going to help you in that situation, I think, where you're actually actively trying to stack, because Seer Stone is this 3-cost action. Look at the top card of your deck. You can put it on the bottom and then create a Ponder token. Obviously, really, really powerful. You get to draw that card at the end of turn, and you can potentially arsenal it. The Ponder as a token is really interesting to me. I think on Swell Tidings, really powerful. You get to play 2-card hands, and then you get to draw a card and arsenal it. And I think that works a lot better when you have a lower blue count, because you don't really genuinely want to arsenal blues in Kano. But that card in Icelander is more interesting to me, I think. That's one of the cards, if I talk about Icelander, you said, what's it gotten in the current builds? Even Swell Tidings could be a potential slot into at least familiar-ish Icelander builds. But yeah, Seer Stone and Brainstorm, that Brainstorm combo and where Seer Stone fits in. I think Brainstorm, there's already 2 avenues people are looking at. Seer Stone, I think, is maybe a little bit less obvious, and I'm not sure if that's just a pure, help you set up combos, because you can even go back to like the old days of Stir Forked, right, in Classic Constructed, and maybe there's options there. So maybe you can play this like deck that has multiple ways to combo off. You have a Wildfire draw, you have a Stir Fork draw, you have Blessing of Aether. Blessing of Aether is a card that probably is one of the most interesting to me. Maybe not the card I'm going to put into every Wizard deck I play, but that card's super interesting as a build around.
Yeah, I could definitely see that card getting played, to be honest. Like Blessing of Aether, so 1 for 3 is pretty below rate, but not when it hits a Aether Spindle on the following turn. Yeah, this card has the potential to be extremely powerful. It does have to hit in your main phase, so it's not going to pop a Wildfire or anything like that. But Aether Flaying this, or like you talked about, Stir Forked, but as you Stir Fork after a Blessing of Aether setup, it's going to be ridiculous. Like this card, I think it's a bit underrated right now. I'll have to play with it more to see if it's actually viable, because this idea of setting up this aura in Kano is like, I don't know, maybe it'll be clunky, maybe it won't be. I think I'm higher on this card in comparison to other people. So I'm really excited to play with Blessing of Aether in particular. Hey, and I got to ask you a question, though, about Surgeon Aethertide. Is that, what the heck is going on with that staff? Like, do you play this staff? Like, I just don't understand. Is it like a future card, or what's going on here?
Yeah, so there's 3 cards we haven't talked about. Surgeon Aethertide, Tempest or Aurora, and what's the third card we talked about? Mind Warp.
The Mind Warp.
Yeah,
which is a sick card.
It's cool. I love the art on that card, by the way.
Yeah.
We can't cover every card in this Dynasty review, and we also just don't have a lot to say right now. So I'm gonna leave it up to you. But in terms of Aethertide, I don't have much to say other than I don't think it fits into any of the sort of potential builds I've looked at so far. The interesting thing, of course, with this is you basically you pay one more than a Crucible to get a damage effectively, but if your opponent defends it, well, then you don't get the buff effect. So Surgeon Aethertide to me is not interesting right now, but it could be in the future. Aurora is not interesting to me right now, and Mind Warp is interesting to me, but I haven't had much time to think on that card right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance between like you get the additional damage effect and you still get the buff, but it's just hard to see it beating out Waning Moon and then also beating out Crucible, because Crucible is just so economical, and what Crucible does is very specific, right?
Yeah.
Like that's when I think when you're switching out to Waning Moon, you start to realize that how important Crucible is in Kano, because Kano most of the time is not raw damage, right? It's some sort of on-hit effect, it's some sort of multiplicative effect. So that +1 is like very, very significant. And you have to change the way you play the hero significantly when you switch over to something like Waning Moon.
Yeah, well, don't forget, if you're wanting to play a pure damage arcane build that isn't multiplying any effects, isn't trying to combo, whatever it might be, you're playing below rate and you start at 30 life as Kano. So
yeah,
good luck to you.
100%.
You have to have something. So yeah, and also worth noting on Aethertide, if the damage, that first point of damage is defended, then you don't get the Crucible effect. It's where X damage. So those cards.
A lot of interactivity. I don't know if I'm about that life when I'm playing Kano.
Yeah, we'll see on those cards, but yeah, I think it's time to move on and talk about Guardian. Yeah, Guardian's next up, so we'll talk about Guardian. And let's move on to Runeblade.
Yep, so on to the real classes in Flesh and Blood. Runeblade, one of Legend Studios' favorite class. Okay, we can say something about it.
We can talk about Guardian a little bit, I think. Do you know what? It's so funny. Me and Brendan were messaging each other about the show notes, and I said to him, all right, you've got this hero. We both can cover Wizard easily. And then I said, Guardian. I've got some notes, Brendan, but I'll be honest, I think it is the worst class in Dynasty in terms of what it's been given. Not out of interest, just out of like, what are you doing with these cards?
I mean, out of interest too, to be fair, but that could be biased. Like,
yeah, I think it's a bit biased.
I thought the Guardian was one of those boring ones in Everfest, and I think when we talked about it, you disagreed heavily, and I when I revisited that thought, I was like, okay, maybe you're correct. Like, got some cool pieces. Man, Guardian is just really not doing it for me these days. Like, it's hard for me to get excited about this class, especially when it moves into more of this, like, even more defensive, and I don't know. These new cards, it does represent a new-ish archetype, especially in the way you utilize the shield. But for me in particular, it's like the last thing I want to do when I'm seeing a bunch of new cards and like new combos. I'm like, oh yeah, I just want to go, try to fatigue people out a bit more. But if any of these things are above rate, just quantitatively, yeah, they might make your Guardian deck, right? Or if there's, I feel like there's a sliding scale, right? Either you can fatigue people or you play cards that are above rate. Like, that is the extent of Guardian's sort of defense spectrum. And if you're not doing that, like, they're kind of useless.
Let's break it into a few different parts, because there's some interest here, and it depends on what you're into, I think. So you've got a new hero. You've got Yoji, right? So I talked about Arachne being like the newest hero in Flesh and Blood. Of course, we do also have Yoji, but to me, Yoji looks like a PvE/multiplayer hero. I think it's pretty safe to say, right? That's where Yoji sits.
Definitely.
So I'm not going to dive too much into Yoji. Then you have this offhand and offhand related piece. And then the last piece is you have auras. And we'll get to that. I think that's kind of the last piece, plus a couple of new blues at Majestic that are interesting. But let's talk about the offhand piece first. So you do have two shields in the form of Season Savior and Steel Braid Buckler. And you have these cards that interact with your offhand weapons, so offhand equipment, which we already do have in the form of Stalagmite, of course, for Oldhim only at this point. And then we have Ram's Head, which can be played in Bravo or even Velda as well, right? So Shield Bash, the card you have Shield Wall, you have this Reinforced Steel, which helps you get -1 counters off of your offhands, and then Withstand, another card that's going to give you plus. So it's all about giving extra defense, and then some cards that take some Battle Worn counters off. The problem I have with these cards is that I think apart from Shield Wall, which is it Shield Wall? Yeah, which is basically, it read as a 6 for 11. So 3 cards for 11. That's above rate. Everything else is below rate. But also even Shield Wall, that require, like, what are you defending for 11? And paying 3 cards into it. Like, hey, like you draw this card, you have to immediately want to be able to play it because it's a defense reaction. So I think
Mirror tech.
Yeah, right. That would be the option. It's like pulverized tech. So it's the cards I think we've got are not as interesting to me, and I don't really have much to touch on. But still, Steelbraid Buckler is probably the most interesting of this offhand equipment sort of piece, because I think we could see this in Bravo, for instance. This with the Titan System Bravo is somewhat interesting. I really would have liked to have seen another one-handed weapon go alongside these offhand equipment. I think that would have been interesting to me. Something that maybe interacts with offhand equipment or some way to attack. Like just overall, if I was to give an 8.5, 9 rank to Dynasty sort of grade, that's probably what I would give it. But I think it's losing half a point from the Guardian stuff here, because I'd rate my sort of overall take on Guardian at like a 3 or a 4.
Yeah, I wonder, when it comes to Guardian and Guardian design, like, they do have 2 avenues, and they've taken avenue number 2 this time, which is more defensive. They've sort of pushed this design space of the offhand and the shield. Like, would it have been more interesting if it was just another bunch of big attacks with on-hit triggers? I think that...
No, I agree. Like, we talked about what we wanted from Dynasty. We said we want Crucible-esque. We want something that goes a little bit wider as opposed to a little bit deeper. And that's what we've got, to be fair. I think...
Yeah, wider and deeper is always great. But, on to Runeblade. That's this thing. Hayden and I, fundamentally, at this point in the game, and I think we can say this, and this is something I think we're just not the biggest Guardian players. Like, I understand and I like Bravo for what it is. I understand Oldhim very well, but I'm looking at these cards and I'm not like, boom, this is going to create a new Guardian archetype for me. This is what Oldhim needed to come out of the depths or whatever it is. It's just not there quite yet. I think that these cards are either going to be busted in some sort of new defensive archetype, or they're above that quantitative matrix and they're just played as a value card, which Guardians these days is like, it's very much a value oriented deck. Go look at the top 8 of the World Championships. A lot of those Guardian decks are predicated off, casting 4-cost big Guardian attacks with a tune counter and pitching 1 card. Yeah. Or Command and Conquer Pummel for one card pitch. It's the idea of like cheating on this like single card pitch for above rate. And the Guardian deck just seems sort of like a value deck these days.
Yeah, Season Savior is interesting to me. Also, it looks really cool in Marvel.
It looks great. So
we'll see where that goes. The 3 cards I do want to touch on the outside of that offhand piece. So Buckle. I think Buckle's interesting. It's Tear Asunder-esque. It's not as good, I don't think, but it is really relevant. People have to be careful with their equipment. I think you can even just play this as a one-off. Another blue that can slot into Bravo or even Ultim, but particularly Bravo, really easily, and have this kind of, this with Anathos coming in for 7 and threatening your key equipment on the other side of the table, your opponent's key equipment, is really good and really relevant. So I do think Buckle is a good card, and we're going to see that card get played. I think it's the card that's probably going to see the most play out of Guardian from the set. Never Yield is interesting. If you can hit all 3 abilities on Never Yield, which is this this life gain 1, you draw a card and you can remove a -1 counter from a piece of your equipment if you have less equipment than your opponent. If you can hit like consistently 2 to 3, that card's really interesting to me. If you're hitting consistently 2 to 3, Is there a bit of a problem with what's happening in the game, though? Because generally that might not fit a lot of Guardian's plans. But, being below on life in Guardian isn't a bad thing. But generally you'd probably be saving your equipment if that's the case. So that one's interesting to me. I want to talk about Blessing of Patience, because like every time we get to Guardian and we talk about Guardian, I talk about Aura Guardian, and we've got another Aura for this Guardian deck. Brendan, maybe this set will finally be the set where I build up Aura Guardian.
No longer just a Welcome to 8th Draft archetype. You think it's going to make its way into CCA?
Well, Blessing of Patience is definitely interesting. It gives you a cheap aura, which I think is really interesting for the... Oh, I've forgotten the card name. The one that is from Tales of Aria and draws you a card if you control another aura. So you can... This one doesn't have Go Again, though. That is the issue with this one, but Embolden, that's what it's called. But I'm really interested in having a cheap aura, access to a cheap aura in this potential Guardian aura build. But anyway, that's enough about Guardian. I'm interested to see if people can come up with ways to use this offhand. My gut feelings we're not going to see it used competitively, but with Yoji, with other things, I expect to see it in some way, shape, or form. Apart from Buckle, we're going to see Buckle.
Yeah, it might be. There might be. I don't know. There might be a use case for it, not against aggro, but when you come to playing against aggro, which is most of the meta, the Ice Shield is just way too good. It's great. So I don't know. Maybe against like opposing Guardians, but I don't know. Guardian just has access to a really good shield already in the form of the Ice Shield, which well, for Ultim, Bravo doesn't have access to that, and that's what I think the braid is Yoji, Velda, Bravo. That's 3 Guardians. Yeah, I always think about Bravo as just like Oldhim's like stepbrother. He's just not quite there. I don't know. Oldhim just seems like a better Guardian having access to Crown of Seas, the Oldhim ability, and Bravo's hero attacks effectively kind of being blank in some of these metas. But
so interesting because you've twice played Bravo at an event when I've told you not to play Bravo, if you remember.
Nostalgia, let's go.
You've done it twice. I miss it twice. It's twice last minute. But you're playing that ProQuest. What are you playing? Playing Bravo. Why are you playing Bravo? Play Levia. It's the second best deck in the format. Why are you playing the fourth best deck? And then, you're playing in that Battle Hardened in Dallas. What are you playing? Why are you playing Bravo, Brendan? What's going on?
Should have seen Michael Fang ask me why I'm playing Bravo instead of Oldhim, and
Great question.
Didn't have an answer.
Why? I think your answer was fire at that point.
Yeah.
You played a million.
Which is not a good enough answer, I don't think. If you think about like the competitive advantage of Oldhim, it's like, or of Bravo, it's like, oh. All right, on the Runeblade. I think at this point in our careers, in the 85th episode of Arsenal Pass, you are now the Runeblade guy, Hayden. So take us in.
How did that happen? I remember. Well, I guess we both worked on Chain during
you
the
probably like won a national championship or something like just that little thing.
Fair enough. Well, let's talk about Viscerai first then. I think the way we'll do Runeblade heroes, we will go through each of the Runeblade heroes and talk about the cards I think that they get, because some of the cards I think we probably won't bother touching on, to be honest. So let's talk about Viscerai, and I'm not going anywhere without talking about Looming Doom, Brendan, because this card is for real. I'm not sure if you've had much of a chance to look at, think about, see things about this card, but Looming Doom it's not busted. I think it has the potential to be really, really good as an archetype on its own. So Looming Doom, I think there's a few ways you can look at this. You can look at this with pure Creepers interaction in mind and what this can do in, say, pretty standard Viscerai builds. You can look at this with OTK potential, with a card like Blessing of a Cult, which is also new in this, another way to generate rune chance. And you could look at a way where not even OTK, that's the wrong terminology, I guess, but you could potentially have this build where you look at stacking up a bunch of rune chance early in the game, very defensive, and then you Looming Doom for a massive amount and you grind your opponent out that way, basically by being super defensive. Mm-hmm. That requires him to only play AB1, so that might fall a bit short in round 2 when your opponent's seeing you round 1 go to time and you've played that strategy. The last one is, it's just a good card, and it has many setups that you can do. And this is, especially against control decks, that's the most interesting one for me. So I'm going to start with that one. I think where Looming Doom is going to find the most home, or I guess find itself most at home, is in pretty traditional Viscerai shells, where you do things like, turn 1, Mordred Tired, read the runes, and then turn 2, I slap down this Looming Doom, play pretty defensively. I set up this Looming Doom with 8 to 10 counters on it, and now I'm threatening 16 to 20 damage over the course of the game. And if my opponent wants to defend that, they'll now either have to pitch a card to, probably they're only playing AB1, so they probably can only defend one of it. Maybe if I'm coming with other arcane damage, they can find some use for their resources. But what if I'm not? What if I'm just taking this turn off to block up a Guardian matchup, or I decide to play with 2 cards from my own turn and just come in with something like a Spellblade Assault for a setup for the following turn? It's really, the Looming Doom value in this more sort of traditional Viscerai build, I think, is really high. And people have to be playing AB2. And you know what? If they're playing AB2 against me, that's fine. I just won't play the Looming Doom. I'll just come in with the rune chance for normal damage.
It's a blue that blocks for 3. Just keep them off, showing them. It's good. They have less armor to block on hit triggers with.
Yeah. So card it's effectively, it reminds me a lot of what Rosetta Thorn does in grindy matchups, where you're just leaking that damage through, and I think that's where we're going to see Looming Doom at its best. But I do just want to cover a couple of other things. I do think there's a potential for a more sort of setup-based Viscerai deck to come back into the format with, you've got this Blessing of a Cult that's coming as well, which helps you make more rune chance. And then the other thing is, I don't know if you know about this, Brennan, but do you know that with Creepers, you can also, there's a line where you can have the damage from the rune chance come in, and you also get the Looming Doom value counters off them as well.
I know because you're telling me, but if I'm trying to picture how that happens, I'm just like, this is my classic with any of those weird interactions. I'm like, Hayden, just tell me the exact sentence to say to my opponent, and I'm just gonna remember that. And it's like, if they ever ask me a question, I'm gonna repeat that sentence.
Yeah. So there's the Creepers, and the way that Spellbound Creepers works has some really interesting things with layer interactions. So there's a way you can play double Revel and Runeblood without having played a non-attack action this turn because of Creepers interaction. Of course, for Creepers to be able to be viable, you have to have attacked with an attack this turn. So that makes it really difficult to by the time it's an attacking card, the rune chance have already, you're too late on that. But the way you can do it is you can play an attack, and then after that you can play something like a Revel and Runeblood, making some amount of rune chant tokens. You can come in with another attack, and when those rune chant tokens are on the chain, the first one's on the chain about to pop, or they all pop, sorry, and then they trigger and they're about to deal the damage, you can then Creepers in your Looming Doom and it still sees the rune chance, will destroy them. You will get the counters on Looming Doom, and the damage is still going to resolve. So really interesting layer interaction there between how that works. It sounds really
Kind of
powerful.
like frostbites, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a similar layer interaction to frostbites and how that works with Ice Eternal. The tough thing though is that it sounds great in theory, but that's a lot of resources. Looming Doom costs 3. You have to have already come in with an attack. You have to be able to pay for creepers. You have to have a card like Revel and Runeblood to be able to actually to play, or maybe even, I don't know, what's another one that creates rune chance? Probably a Spellbed Assault is more relevant, to be honest, playing a Spellbed Assault on the first chain link. But it is harder to do, but that is an interaction that is around it. I'm sure people will try and build around it. I don't think it's worth trying to hold Looming Dooms and Arsenal to try and make this kind of play, but it's going to come up in some games. But I think that's probably in builds where you're looking at a traditional Visceride list, like I talked about, with Looming Doom just being a good card.
Oh yeah, that's the thing about these blue block 3s. They don't have to do much to make it into the deck. If they're an alternate win condition, hell yeah, throw them in. So I think it's just be a staple.
Yeah, it always surprised me that people cut in traditional Visceride builds, cut down on Dread Triptych. Like, I think that card is still really, really powerful, but people have moved away from that card, which I do find surprising, because I think that card is, in non-belittle builds, really, really relevant. But I think in terms of Visceride, just some of the other cards to cover, we've got this new theme of like fusion, effectively. If you've pitched with a non-attack and an attack action, you get different abilities on the card. So you've got Cryptic Crossing, Diabolic Ultimatum, you've got this Deathly Duet, Aether Slash. I think those are the cards. Yeah, those are all the cards that do that. So they have a text line for if you've pitched a non-attack, and they also have a text line if you've pitched with a attack and a non-attack. And if you've done both, you'll get both effects. So Cryptic Crossing is the Majestic that I think people are going to look to first. It's a 3-cost 6 attack that it gets first time it deals damage to a defending hero, they discard a card and you draw a card. That's if you've done both. So you've got to, in that one instance, do both, and then the rest all have single tick line for each non-attack and attack. And the one I want to talk about mostly is probably Deathly Duet. I think this is the one that is going to be the most interesting. It reminds me of Stir the Wildwood, because if you can fulfill both sort of criteria, like with Stir the Wildwood, the arcane damage and the Earth Fusion, it was a 2 for 8, right, Brennan? It became 2 for 8. That's the same with Deathly Duet. So Deathly Duet, if you've done both non-attack and attack action, it'll get the +2, plus it'll also get create 2 rune chance. So you're effectively looking at a 2 for 8.
Yeah, I really do wonder about this mechanic, right? Like, how easy is it going to be pull off? Is it easier to fuse with 2 cards from your hand than it is to pitch like this? So if you think about you think so? Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, because even not only is it very expensive on like how many cards you need to keep in your hand to be able to kind of pull these things off, but it's like, what kind of Visceride lines are doing this? Yeah. And are they more effective than playing like Mauvern Skies 2 costs, and usually in the form of Shrill, and then swinging your Rosetta Thorn? So we have 2 for 6, and yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's pretty tough to pull off. And Cryptic Crossing, though, I think that's a really cool card, because I think that's a card that you could potentially play something with Go again, and then actually be able to satisfy both clauses on this card, because the on-hit trigger is so significant. I do want to ask you, though, Hayden, is Amethyst Tiara, is that a card that you would include in your sideboard at this point?
Probably not right now, but I think it has a lot of potential. I mean, I wanted to ask you about how annoying this would be as a Wizard player, right?
I just don't think people can justify putting it in their decks, to be honest, because like I try to think about how you would actually have all these rune chants available, and I think in current Rosetta Thorn Runeblade decks, it's very, very unlikely that you would have them sort of at the time you need them, right? So you'd have to have most likely a different archetype, and at that point, it's like, are you powerful enough to beat any of the other decks? I just don't see this as like, okay, this is a sideboard card and you're just able to whip it out against Wizard if the Wizard threat is justifiable enough. I think if you have this card in your sideboard and you don't have the right archetype for this card, like, it'll actually still just be a bad card against Wizard.
Yeah, I think you're probably looking at these more setup-based decks, and you go like, yeah, I can afford to sacrifice 4 or 5 rune chance here to stop my opponent comboing and killing me. Because one of the tough things about playing a setup deck is that you're probably having to tap out, like go shields down a lot and dump your hand to, do something like block out with 2 cards, Mordred Tide plus read the runes, things like that, or become the Mordred Tide, become the Arcanite, read the runes, 3 cards. So I think that's where Tiara could be viable, but it's going to be meta-specific, I think. That's the same with Diabolic Ultimatum, just going back to those fusion cards. I think that's you've got to be in a part where you want to be destroying auras or its allies, right? Yeah.
Yeah, auras or allies. This one I could see. This one I think is more of a sideboard card potentially, right? Like to really deal with some hateful things. Yep. So yeah, this card I see being played potentially more likely than something like Tiara. One thing I want to mention about Diabolic Ultimatum is like, what the hell is this art? Because this is interesting, actually. This is like some big, and this, I know this is not a normal Arsenal Pass take here, but this is like some big Runeblade monster, and like some dude seems to be making like an ultimatum, I guess, or like a pact with it, which is, from my understanding, not something we've seen in like Runeblade, to be honest, before, is like them making pacts with allies. I guess Ursur is a version of that, but I don't know. For some reason, it stands out to me, and if there's a piece of art that stands out to me, I feel like that's pretty significant, because most of the time I just see numbers.
Look at Looming Doom. Looming Doom also has something similar. Yeah. I think it goes back to this Demonastery. We won't go too much more tangent, but just the Demonastery and the closeness of the Demonastery with Shadow and obviously Viscerai Chain. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The lore side of Flesh and Blood is really cool. I wish they would actually do a little bit more, because I would probably at this point consume it, to be honest. I want to quickly talk about just lines with Deathly Duet and potentially Cryptic Crossing, but there is a lot of things you can do, and I think that with the reason we might see this card is because of lines you could play. They're going to be 4 and 5 card lines, but it is things like, I think with Rattlebones in particular, like Rattlebonesing a Swimming Gloom Veil or something like that, with, say, an incantation already on the play from the start of the turn, then pitching another card to come with Deathly Duet. If you also have a Mothering Skies for the Deathly Duet, now you're looking at 4 to 5 card hands that can put out a lot of damage. Like, you're looking at 20 damage off 4 to 5 card hands. So Deathly Duet is interesting to me. I don't know. Like, Shrill Moth is just so much cleaner. So
flexible. So flexible as well. Like that.
We'll see.
I don't know. Yeah.
I'm excited to play around with it. And I think the blue and then the red, probably in that order as well, I'll play around with stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But Skyfire Lancer, is that going in your deck?
Yeah, I want to talk about Skyfire Lanterns. No, it's not going anywhere near my deck. I can't see a home for Skyfire Lanterns. The one I thought of was a Redline Briar deck, when maybe you play the red one, but it doesn't. It just gives you a Rune Chant, which is not really where you want to be. Like, it feels like it needs to be at home in Viscerai, but you know, maybe I'm playing this like ridiculous blue setup Viscerai deck with a lot of blues in my deck. Maybe I can pop the blue Skyfire Lanterns in there. Might be the home for it. If
Bloodshade Scalata was still a card, I might play Skyfire Lanterns blue at like some point. But yeah, I'm at a loss for this one. But this one kind of feels like a booster filler. I just don't understand. I don't see it. So if you see it, let me know, because I don't see it.
No, I don't see it.
Yeah.
The Briar piece that's interesting to me as well is the Runic Reaping. That's the one I thought maybe Briar might use that card, but it has to be Runeblade cards, so I don't know. Like, unless Briar goes back to a lot of the elemental Runeblade cards, I don't really see it. The other piece as well, probably if you look at Chain and Blitz, I don't really see anything too much for that right now. What else is there? The Annals of Sutcliffe is an interesting weapon, right? Again, is this like Searstone? Is this a setup weapon? I don't know at this point. So if you haven't seen this one, it's the once per turn action, cost 3, draw a card, and if attack and a non-attack were used to pay for it, then you create a Rune Chant. So, but that requires you pitching 2 cards. So you need to be doing something else at the same time.
My question would actually be pull it back even more fundamentally, which is like, is Flesh and Blood a setup game? Because at this point, it's like a lot of those strategies have lost their integrity because the game is so fast, and some decks are doing things that are so powerful, like Icelander, right? I guess that would be like the setup deck we have, but it's not really a setup deck. It's more of a tempo deck that just has cards that are so ridiculously powerful that it's also a combo if you want to do that. So like, if you're just playing this deck that's trying to play towards like a more linear end game plan, it feels like you get run over by a lot of stuff in the format, and they get outvalued by these sort of mid-range decks that come in the form of Icelander and stuff.
Yeah, I like to make a distinction right now between setup decks, combo decks, because a setup deck is something that is looking to actively do a repetitive thing or do certain things on specific turns to get to a point in the game. A combo deck, something like Kana, for instance, is looking for a particular set of cards at any point in the game, or a particular point in the game maybe, but is not moving towards that in some way, shape, or form, other than just draw the cards or find them. Whereas, you know, with something like a Looming Doom or an OTK Viscerai, for instance, like, it's like turn after turn, set up Rune Chants. I agree. I think where we've seen decks fall, especially previous meta, it was like, okay, trying to do any kind of setup. In previous metas, trying to do any kind of setup, that was just like a death sentence. We have moved, I think, with Prism LL, Bravo LL, Chain LL to a meta where, or metas where some form of setup is a lot more viable, and we have seen those in some way, shape, or form, but those setups have to be in powerful shells. They have to be additive, not the sole source right now. And I think that is, will we ever see that come back? You know, like a true, because even if you look at Viscerai in the Lightning Briar meta, like you could also just play the Skelada like aggro build, but you did have this like ridiculous powerful combo you could build to. But it was so quick, it was so easy to get to, and cards are replacement level. When you're talking about specific cards, they aren't replacement level. So I don't know. I don't think right now we're gonna get back to that, but in the future, maybe. Always hope.
It's a really interesting topic that we won't go too deep into, but I do think that a lot of the most powerful things, the most powerful sort of setup cards or combo cards in Flesh and Blood are just cards that are like Looming Doom, right? They're like blue, the blues that block 3 that give you this sort of alternate win condition. If they don't do that, most of the time they're actually not making the cut because we're at the stage in the game that we're at. You ask if we could ever go back there. I think it's possible. I think the Prism Living Legend really did a lot to the game that I didn't expect. It had a huge impact on the game, completely changed, I feel like, the dynamic of play. So we could see that as more heroes potentially Living Legend out. I have less faith in the addition of a new heroes. It does feel like that some of the biggest impacts in Flesh and Blood come from problematic heroes actually coming out of the game. So that's really cool. And I just want to talk about, really quickly, just my favorite setup deck in Flesh and Blood, which is I reveal these 3 cards and activate my Star Row ability. That's the best setup deck that's ever existed in Flesh and Blood.
Why are you revealing 3 cards? Just reveal a pulse plus the other card. Why are you revealing 3 cards? What are you talking about?
Just holding the pulse like turbo reveal.
I just want to say one last thing before we move on to Illusionist is I don't even know if that's good for the game. This idea of moving back to... We've never really been there, to be honest. Like, I would say Viscerai was like the closest we had to it, old Viscerai Skelada, but that was because the interaction was so powerful. If we ever get to a point where you have these true full setup decks, I don't even know if it's good for the game. So another topic for another day, but let's move on to Illusionist. Brendan, why don't you... each of these classes in the notes I've kind of broken down a little bit differently. Why don't we talk about the equipment to start with? Like, these are quite interesting to me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the equipment?
Yeah, I mean, so this is Celestial Kimono and Wave of Reality. Celestial Kimono says it's a Illusionist equipment chest. It's the higher rarity one. It says once per turn, when Celestial Kimono or a non-token permanent you control with Ward is destroyed, gain a resource, and it has Ward 1 itself. Ward, by the way, says if you would be dealt damage, prevent X of that damage, X of whatever Ward is, and destroy this. So that's really important, to be honest. So we'll hold on to that. Wave of Reality, this is an arms piece, says when Wave of Reality is destroyed, create a Spectral Shield token, and it has Ward 1. So I think that these are really interesting and more of like a defensive build of Illusionist. I had them in my deck for our Blitz game, and I was playing against Mech, and I realized that like these were probably not very good against Mech, even in Blitz, even if I was able to get that sort of singular value out of the ward. In the resource value, they do seem like they don't slot into, I don't know, like a hybrid Illusionist archetype, right? I think they're in a more dedicated archetype where you're getting enough value out of these, and they're not just popping off on like turn 0, which is worst case scenario, right?
Yeah, that's kind of my question, right? Is Wave of Reality is the same thing. It has Ward 1, and when it's destroyed, create a Spectral Shield. But they don't have defensive value. Their whole piece is around Ward, and so, of course, Wave of Reality has the one-time use. Celestial Kimono, the longer you can keep around, the more potential for value you can get out of it. But regardless, these are going to be destroyed pretty early on. You can pretty safely say, and any deck that can push damage is going to be able to pop these. Like they are really interesting to me. Where is the actual use cases? Where are we going to see these pop up? Like, I'm really not sure.
So a non-token permanent with Ward. So I think you have other cards with Ward, right? That they pop.
Yes. Tome of
turn. That's the idea, right? So that's the big payoff. Is like you're playing with Tome of Ao or Blessing of Spirits, which also has Ward, and these will pop on the start of your turn or your action phase, and then you're getting like, let's say you did that like 3 turns in a row. Like you get like, basically a tuna counter every single turn, and it's really powerful. But then again, you're going to go into your opponent's turn, and you have to have these things not pop. Because the thing about Blessing Experience and Tome of Ao is that once you play them, if you go to your opponent's turn, you take damage and they pop, you actually don't get the effect, which is it makes them quite high investments, to be honest. There's a dichotomy in specifically Prism. So we're talking about Prism here. There's a big dichotomy because, yes, like these cards can be good and you want to be defensive. But when I say it doesn't slot into the normal shells, is like you have auras, which are actually these auras are facilitating you being the control deck, right? But they're also a massive liability when you have Celestial Kimono and Wave of Reality, because now you have 0 blocks in your deck. You're almost certainly going to be taking damage at some point in the game, and the fact that you can take that on turn 0 is like, I mean, these pieces of equipment. I think that it's for an archetype that I don't fully understand yet, and we'll have to see more of that.
I'm not sure the support's there for it. To be honest, the Tome of Ao, like you can choose the obviously where the ward happens. So you can choose Tome of AO, of course, to be destroyed first. I just want to clarify that. So if you Celestial, Kimono, and Tome of AO, and you're getting dealt 1 damage, you can choose the Tome to pop first. Kimono will obviously see that. You gain the resource. Maybe you can do something like play an Aura, for instance, in Prism Blitz. But if we're more focused on Classic Constructed, Tome of AO is actually more interesting to me in Dramai. So it's a blue, does defend 2, which is probably not what you want to be. But if you get some dragons out and you get to play something like a Tome of AO, what's your opponent doing? If they're sort of priced into killing dragons, all of a sudden this Tome of AO is pretty free, and you could be playing a 6-card hand on your next turn because they can't push damage into you.
Yeah, you're totally right. That balance, I guess Prism would have had somewhat of a similar balance with the
Spectra.
auras as well, right? With Spectra, exactly. I think that if your opponent doesn't have Go Again, like this is a way that these Illusionists further punish decks that go tall, right? Because if you do have Go Again, right, you can maybe clear a few dragons, then clear this at the end with like a cheap weapon or something. But if you're only... The thing about Spectra and allies is that if you're playing something like Guardian, they're kind of the same thing, right? Because you only have one you have one action point, but you also only have one attack, so they kind of do the same thing. But yeah, for sure, that's a tough question to ask your opponent when you have a card like this that's threatening to draw a card on your following turn. But they also need to be like, okay, I have to clear these dragons, or it's going to get out of control. So I do think they are particularly interesting in Dramai. And also, when we talk about Classic Constructed, we are only talking about Dramai now.
Yeah, of course. So we could spend more time on this. I think Blessing of Spirits. One thing I do want to point out is Spectral. I can't remember what it's called. The one that makes 3 shields is an instant, doesn't defend, costs you 3. This one costs you 1. Prismatic Shield, that's the one. This one costs you, Blessing Spirits costs you 1 and creates 3 shields at red, and also defends 2 and has ward 1. That's quite interesting in terms of like the rate of return on your Spectral Shields if you can obviously have it survive. That's one I would be looking at, I think, in Blitz. And I think you looked at it in the gameplay, the deck that we used for the gameplay. I think you did have some in there. So let's move on. I want to ask you about these cards that care about... Sorry, there's also Tranquil Passing. We didn't talk about Tranquil Passing. This is another aura that has ward 1. And what does this one do? When Tranquil Passing enters the arena, you may banish target aura token or aura permanent with cost 3 or less controlled by an opponent until Tranquil Passing leaves the arena. Right, this one doesn't destroy at the start of your turn, but once you deal damage. Could be interesting in the mirror, right? Taking out sort of 0 cost auras in the Prism mirror. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, it is interesting. It is interesting in the mirror, but I think that's like not the biggest question you're asking yourself as an Illusionist player, like right now.
Yeah.
I mean, Illusionist in these metas is pretty much positioned as the dog in most, even in Blitz, right? Like in Blitz, it's doing very well, and it was highly played, but it's still not the expected best deck. So you still kind of are the dog, and I don't think you should be prepping. If you're playing Prism, you should be like prepping to play the mirror with this in your Blitz deck. And I don't think that Dramai is a Classic Constructor at a point where they're, maybe seriously considering this card, but it could hit more things that don't immediately come to mind, right? I do want to talk about Soraya though, because that's obviously a marquee card of the set, and probably wasn't meant to come out with Prism, Living Legend, and Classic Constructed. That's just kind of how things happened. Yeah. It's one of the coolest cards of the set. I think it's a very, very powerful card as well. Like if you look at the value on it, you play it, it consumes a Spectral Shield, so 2 resources, then you lose 1 from converting a Spectral to Soraya, but you are threatening, depending if you meet the conditions, right, you're threatening 4, you're threatening to heal as well, heal 4, and it can deal 1 damage, and then it also has ward 4 on the following turn. Like, this is, the numbers on Soraya are crazy, and I think it's one of the more powerful cards, like, in Flesh and Blood. The setup is a bit tight. I guess you have to have a Spectral Shield, but that's really about it. One thing to keep in mind is like the once per turn action of attack doesn't have Go Again. But yeah, Soraya's fantastic.
This card would be so powerful in Classic Constructed. It's a yellow.
I think it would hit the battlefield and you lose the game. Like I think that it looks like it's really, really good.
Well, let me ask you a question. In Constructed with Herald of Erudition, what was the best way to play Herald of Eruditions? Was it to play it when you drew them, or to play them in the late game when your opponent had no equipment left?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely in the late game.
You pitched them most of the time, right? Like I pitched Herald of Erudition way more than I played it, because if my opponent can defend it, it's below rate, right? But Soraya reminds me a little bit of what Herald of Erudition was doing in that Classic Constructor format, where you were getting to second cycle with a lot of these matchups, especially into Guardians and stuff, and then you play something like Soraya. It's like, yeah, I mean, like you just described the value. I don't need to go over that, but the card's super powerful. Also seems powerful in Blitz, just a bit. I think it's a bit less powerful because it's a bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. And if you don't have the Spectral Shield, so a lot of the matchups you're going to be playing in Blitz are aggressive matchups. Even Icelander, the quote-unquote best deck, is pretty aggressive in how it deals damage to you. If you don't have Spectral Shields, then this card doesn't do much, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, it's a
something
yellow,
you can sit-
yellow 3 block.
Yeah,
Which is,
yellow that blocks 3. So if that's okay for you, then yeah, it goes in your deck. But it can be somewhat of a liability if you're planning to play it out. My favorite card in the set, to be honest, for Illusionist is Phantasmal Symbiosis.
Yeah, can we talk about some of these? So can we talk about some of these? Sorry, obviously that's a Phantasm attack, which you can talk about. But then I want you to talk a bit about these Spectral Shield attacks. There's a big theme around this with Spectral Procession, with Spectral Prowler, with Rider. So maybe you can talk a bit about Symbiosis then these shield cards.
Yeah, so I guess Symbiosis sort of falls out of that category, but Symbiosis is a 1 for 6, which is a big deal. And it says when this attacks, name a card. Cards of that name are Illusionist till end of turn. I would almost evaluate this card as like textless, and it's still great, right? It's just a yellow War Tomb Herald.
No. This card's great. You come in and you name your opponent's like Wounded Bull or whatever that can pop this because it's now an Illusionist card that can no longer pop the Symbiosis.
Oh, I didn't think.
That's why it's good.
Dude, it's good. It would be good textless, to be honest. Like 1 for 6 yellow is so good.
That's great, but now you get to your opponent's playing yellow and yellow and red Fendor's Fighting Spirit as their poppers, especially in the mirror, and you're like, okay, I named Fendor's Fighting Spirit.
Oh my god, Runic Reclamation. Can you...
Exactly.
That's so funny. Yeah, because like, okay, so if you're playing against Guardian, you're probably not going to be able to hit it, but you don't need that. Like, you're already beating Guardians, right? So if you're playing against things like Runeblades, which are teching in like Ninth Blades and Runic Reclamation, mostly Runic Reclamation at this point, then they have a very narrow suite of cards to hit, and this is super reasonable. Yeah, it's great. When I was originally talking about the card, I was just talking about it as like a 1 for 6 at yellow. Just really good, because these 1 for 6s are just... You've played War Tomb Herald, you've seen it. You potentially playing 3 War Tomb Heralds in a turn, absolutely where you want to be, and how that interacts with sort of your resource base for playing out these light Illusionist auras. Very, very good.
It's so funny that we talk about this card and you go like, how powerful is this majestic? And it's like, yeah, but it's not. There's no War Tomb Herald, is it?
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. What about these Spectral Shield cards? These cards that care about Spectral Shield, Prowler, Rider, etc.
So I think that a lot of these are... You talked about Blessing of Spirits a bit, and I think that that's interesting in terms of the rate, right? Because those Spectral Shields can't stick around. Some of the stuff that is conditional, like Spectral Prowler, Spectral Procession, I think Spectral Procession is going to be more of a setup card. I don't know if this card is just going to be good as a slot in. That's the one that gets attack equal to the number of Spectral Shields you control. That's quite narrow, to be honest. It's also red. But Spectral Prowler, I played this in the Blitz deck that I played, and... Man, it can be good, but I think if you're playing against aggressive decks and you're not able to sort of keep your Spectral Shields around, they can have a massive downside, right? 0 for 3 with no go again that has Phantasm. So I think that you need to be playing against a deck that is going to allow you to relieve enough pressure to keep your Spectral Shields available, or... Yeah, it's tough because, like, let's say you don't have a Spectral Shield, but you do have cards in Soul because you are playing against like a Runeblade or something like that. Something that's more aggressive but doesn't have a lot of poppers. It's a lot of resources to potentially, and it's quite taxing on your Soul to be banishing, creating a Spectral Shield, and then using that as a condition to play these cards just kind of at rate. So I think they're cool, but it's a different archetype of Prism, to be honest, of Illusionist.
I was gonna say, hear me out. Probably Prism and Blitz, but maybe Dremai. Hear me out. This is the archetype I'm thinking of. Like, if you wanted to go down this avenue and explore this is what I would recommend starting to look at is this really defensive, like, Spectral Shield build with Iris of Reality. I think that's
Iris of Reality, yeah.
That's probably where I would look to start with if you're trying to do something with this and want to do something a bit funky. It's cards like Blessing of Spirits. It's some of these ward cards. You can use some of these ward cards to help you get out Spectral Shields early and then take over the game with some of these cards. And actually... It'll always be like a slow burn. You start with like maybe the first 5-6 turns, you're really just trying to grind, set up, be defensive, get a few shields on the board, and then you're playing a high blue count. All of a sudden, you just like hit it with like a couple of attacks with 2 shields, something like a Procession or a Prowler or Rider or whatever it is. I think that is actually, to be honest, interesting. Is it good? Don't know.
So I tried to build a Spectral Reality Prism deck back when the Everfest came out because Yeah, I mean, Spectral Shields are cool for Iris of Reality, but you know what's cooler is these blue auras that just sit on the board forever because your opponent can't get around to killing them. And, sometimes they have abilities you can kind of ignore. They're very, very sticky weapons. So, like, your Iris of Reality, which used to be 100% dependent on you having Spectral Shields, was now sort of more reliable with these blue auras, right? And you potentially double auring per turn. But that deck didn't quite make it because Luminaris was so freaking busted. It's just like, that was always just better. So, more additions to the Iris of Reality build of Prism. Great and very, very could be what pushes it over the edge, but I do think that Luminaris is just a freaking busted card.
What if they just banned Luminaris? We have to move on. We're going to get to Ninja, but what if they just banned Luminaris? That's interesting. Also, I want to point out someone did 3-0 with young Iris Prism at New Zealand Nationals in the Classic Constructed. So it's a thing. Let's move on. Ninja. Basically, first question I have, because all the cards in Ninja are the same theme. You know, with Illusionist, with Runeblade, with Guardian, there's a couple of split themes. All of the Katsu, sorry, they're not Katsu cards. All of the Ninja cards, bit of a Freudian slip there. All of the Ninja cards are Crouching Tiger cards. So you've had a bit of a chance to play around with some of this. What do you think of Dynasty, Crouching Tiger theme? How good is it? And we can dive into some of the cards after that.
That's fine. I didn't like Blessing of Ki, which is a sort of a setup card. So I was going to read that one out because it's a bit different. It's a 1-cost, 3 defense, and it says, at the start of your turn, destroy Blessing of Ki, then create a Crouching Tiger token in your banished zone. It gains +3. You may play it this turn. So this is an aura that you set up on a previous turn. That card I did not like, but overall, the Crouching Tiger theme and all these cards that go along with it, whether it's Predatory Streak or the payoffs in the form of Ki Unleashed, I do think that it's viable for Katsu, and I think it can be quite good with Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. When I was playing this deck, the Crouching Tiger deck, I was playing it in Budget Blitz without a headpiece, so I was playing Hope Merchant's Hood, in which it was not as good, but I think that playing out these Crouching Tigers and getting a lot of hit triggers to facilitate something like Mask of the Pouncing Lynx and grabbing Salt the Wound, that seems like the use case to me. Let me know if you think any different, but that seems like the payoff. Like that's what you want to be doing if you're adding these kind of cards into your deck. One thing to keep in mind is a lot of them are quite cheap. They do cost 0, so they do facilitate this more low to the ground kind of Katsu build.
So Crouching Tigers in general, I think it's super cool. I think it's really, really cool. I love that we've seen this now in Flesh and Blood, this thing a card that basically gets made and then ceases to exist. That isn't a token. You can actually put this in your deck. Would not recommend it. But, these cards that become and then cease to exist, and it's quite a cool idea, I think. The power level of it, I think there's a couple of things you can do. So you can either build around this entirely, and you can look at these really big kind of setup plans with, like, Roar of the Tiger. I think that card is one of the most powerful things you can be doing with, say, like, you get a Roar of the Tiger, Art of War turn, or double Roar of the Tiger or something. Like, you can be off running with maybe, like, a Predatory Streak. The combo aspect of, like, Ki or Chi, I guess depends if it's Chinese or Japanese, right? I think it might be Chi, right? I think it might be... Anyway, the combo aspect of that is quite interesting, but I think whether you want to build around it, I think it's going to be a bit clunky, and I think you're not going to have the power output that you need to, because the spike turns are really good. Don't get me wrong. Like, you hit Art of War, you hit Roaring Tiger, you have you guaranteed draw off Mask of Momentum. To be honest, I'd be playing Pouncing Lynx and getting Salt the Wound, like you say, every single time. Like, that's what I'm looking to do, is just really big combo turn. But what I'm more interested in, I think, is a more sort of just aggressive Ninja deck, head jabs, 100 win lines, and then have the good sort of the good Crouching Tiger piece in there where you can pop off. It's almost like a fire pop off turn. And then the question, I guess, becomes is it a Katsu thing or is it a fire thing? Obviously, you talked about Blessing, so that has combo. You can go and that's not the one with combo. What's the one with combo? Pouncing.
Ki Unleashed. Oh, I mean, there's a couple of them.
Yeah. So there is Tiger Swipe. Tiger Swipe's the other one I was thinking of. So it feels like it fits more naturally into Katsu, but maybe it could fit into an aggressive fire shell that doesn't worry about Draconic as much. So yeah, there's a few different avenues you can take. How good is it? It's pretty scary when it comes off. Like, when they have that Art of War, Roar of the Tiger, like Roar of the Tiger on those turns can effectively be like a mini Art of War, except you don't get the buff on your non-Crouching Tigers, but it does cost you 0, so some trade-off there.
Yeah, I don't see myself playing Predatory Streak in a Fi deck.
Bit of a
I
trap,
don't know
maybe,
why.
that one.
Yeah, that one seems significant to me. I do like the aspect of being able to tutor up some of the cards, especially Tiger's Wipe. That seems like the one you want to be tutoring up. In Katsu rather than Fi, I'd rather it not be like, oh, I just need to kind of find this card to get my big payoff.
Tutor it up.
Yeah, tutor it up for sure. So I don't see this immediately slotting into the Fi deck that we all know and love at this point that just runs over a lot of tournaments, but it is fundamentally powerful, which I think is important. I think that's cool, right? Ninjas, or at least Katsu's gotten the short end of the stick for quite a long time now, and this does feel like an expansion to Katsu in particular. I do want to quickly talk about Lava Burst V2 here, or as Blazing Yori as it's known.
The defensive Lava Burst.
Yeah, the defensive Lava Burst, the sideboard card that will pretty much make most Ninja decks, depending on the meta, which is, if it's in this meta, this is definitely going in your Ninja deck.
For mirrors,
yeah,
right?
defends. Yep, for mirrors, just blocks a Lava Burst, right? It blocks for 5. It's close to Carrion Husk value. So yeah, it's if you're looking for a Ninja card to pick up that you almost absolutely need, I think this is it. I think Blazing Yori is a card that will absolutely be played, especially when there's a bunch of 5s running around.
Yep. I think the last thing I'd say is if you are looking at, I agree, I would look at Katsu as the Crouching Tiger deck, and the way I would start is I would probably start all in, to be honest, and just work out what are the lines that are the most explosive, what are the lines that are most exciting. Do I actually Flex Claws, for instance, like it's a leg tap with the Crouching Tiger upside. So if you are looking to play some amount of Crouching Tiger pieces, like that's a card I'm definitely looking at with Roar of the Tiger, etc. But I would probably start all in and then start to move into more like hit jabs and other cards to line up and see kind of where the balance, like if I treat it as a sliding scale, one end is like full Crouching Tiger degeneracy, like I'm into it, and then the other end is just like traditional Katsu aggro deck. Like where am I going to be on that spectrum? I think you want to find your slot.
Yeah, my biggest question is whether does Pouncing Key just like kind of immediately slot into the Fi deck, right? Just as another head jab.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have Go Again if you don't have a Crouching Tiger, though. I think there's
I didn't. Yeah, I forgot that it was.
It's all combo based, that one. Yeah.
Never mind. It's freaking trash. You heard it here.
I think it might be the worst one. Yeah. Anyway, all right, we're going to move on to the newest class in Flesh and Blood. We're going to talk about Assassin because I wanted to leave this till last. I wanted to try and get some games in last week and find out what I actually think. There's so much discourse around this hero. It's trash. It's slightly playable. It's super interesting, but maybe it doesn't have enough thought. There's so much discussion. The deck is like tier 1.5. It's almost close to being one of the best decks. Like there's a lot of different discussion. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is just Arachne itself and this hero ability. I think it's super cool to have this kind of Fate Seal ability, as people who play Magic would call it, this ability to look at that top card, set up for contract, but also mess with what your opponent's trying to do. Especially when your opponent is looking for specific cards in certain matchups. You know, you're playing into a Rhino who wants to find Blood Rush Bellows. All of a sudden you tuck a Blood Rush Bellows. Like that is a big chunk of effective life you're going to gain from that hero ability. So I think Arachne itself is a really interesting hero ability. And then, of course, get into actually what Assassin cards are. But let's start with the weapons, Brendan, because these have surprised me. Yeah, Spider's Bite has surprised me a lot. It felt like, when I first looked at it, I was like, it's like Kadachi light, right? 2 for a 1 attack with Go Again. It feels like a kind of a bad Kadachi. But the way this works in with a lot of the cost structure of Assassin is really cool. I think you probably want to play quite a high blue count. At least coming in with 1 Spider's Bite per turn is going to, if they don't defend it, they're immediately committing to now finding it really difficult to defend your on-hit effect, because you hit the piercing, you come in, it has piercing itself, so it's hard to block out the equipment, and then it gives -1 to attack actions defending. Now all of a sudden you come in with a 1 for 5 or a 0 for 4 afterwards, and it's like, okay, well now I have to use 2 cards minimum, and it starts to get, and not even equipment, like 2 cards from hand, or 2 cards plus an equipment if it's a 1 for 5. Now you're starting to get really difficult with how you defend these on-hit effects, and that's if you, depending on the makeup of the deck, right? Obviously, you're going to run some decks where it's like Wizard, and they're like, okay, I mean, I don't care. I run all non-attack actions, but Spider's Bite has definitely overperformed so far in my experience, and the piercing text on it is not irrelevant either. The cost structure, how it works in with Assassin, super interesting. And sometimes you just have like 3-card hand or 4-card hand, 2 blues, come in with a double Spider's Bite, which then gives them another -1, and then come in with the attack afterwards.
Yeah, I've been on the other side of these weapons, and they are super annoying. If you're playing something like Brute, I was like, oh my god. Yeah, Hayden was absolutely piecing me apart with these weapons the other day when I was on Brute. It's just so awkward, like you said. Like it just kind of fits with exactly what you're already trying to do. You come with the Spider's Bite, then the 1 for 4, 1 for 5, and it's just, if you let that Spider's Bite hit, you are priced into defending with 2 cards to defend the next attack, which is a lot.
Yep. Yeah, who would have thought the design of the weapon just fits really well with what the hero is trying to do in the cards. Let's talk a bit
You'd
about...
be surprised in Flesh and Blood, actually.
Yeah, almost like there's some good design. Let's talk a bit about the equipment, because this is probably, I think, the ones people will be most excited about. Black Tech Whisperer's legendary surface level looks super, super powerful. You know, it's like Valiant Dynamo meets Snapdragon Scalers. Like that's kind of what it looks like on the surface. In reality, it's a lot harder to pull together, I think. I haven't played as much Classic Constructor. I've mostly played so far in Blitz, where I think I've returned it maybe once or twice. It does require you to destroy these silvers, but if you can do this a couple of times over the course of the game, it's going to stop you from... It's going to be able to stop on-hit effects from your opponent. It's going to be able to allow you to push a couple of really big contract turns, 2 or 3 contract attacks that are going to net you a lot of silver. And when you can roll that, like there's this kind of tempo thing that Arachne can do if you gain tempo. You can just start to like stack up silver, continue to return your Black Tech Whisperers. Now that is really hard and your opponent can break the tempo, but if you do that across 3 turns, all of a sudden you can get a pretty good lead in the game and really force your opponent. And also, keep in mind, you're messing with the top of their deck as well, which is really relevant. So Black Tech Whisperers, I think, is powerful. And I mean, that's kind of all I've said. Like, the card is good.
How many times do you have to activate it for it to be great?
To be great? Twice.
Okay.
Well, if you get...
It's not too much to ask.
Two Iron Rot Boots and 2 Snapdragon Scalers out of it. It's pretty good. Obviously, it's not quite... It's more like Refraction Bolters, but... just a quick chat to Suri there to turn some lights on. Brendan, I love the last few pods we've done. It's like the time, we've switched times because of daylight savings and stuff. It just gets progressively darker, Brendan fades into the darkness as we get closer to talking about Assassin.
And then you see me mute my mic and say something, and then the light pops on.
Yeah. So Black Tech Whisperer is very good. I think it's one of the reasons you want to play Arachne right now, because the problem I have with Arachne is just the card pool is obviously really small. There's only so many things you can do. So if I was to look at how I would build Arachne right now, I think you can play this more like mid-range value orientated with, you play a bit more generics. You play defense reactions, 0 for 4 defense reactions. You play Command and Conquers, E-Strikes, etc. Like, I think that's the kind of build, that's the similar build I played in Blitz. That's the kind of build I'd be looking at the moment. I think trying to play an aggressive build, your on-hits are good, but what they're trying to do is disrupt your opponent. They're not going to gain you extra value. So playing aggressive, I think, is you're just going to lose to other aggressive decks.
Trap. Yeah, when all of your cards block for 3 and you have a weapons like these weapons that look like they're kind of like spider bites, it feels like the thing you want to be doing is you're either going to be a defensive deck that's playing towards some sort of end game, or you're just a mid-range deck, right? Like this feels like the true iteration of what Katsu Control was back in the day, right?
Yeah, it feels a bit more mid-rangey to me. Like you're trying to grind out. Like, put it this way: the longer the game goes, the more value you're going to get out of cards like Spider's Bite, out of Black Tech Whisperers, Mask of Perdition, if that's what you want to play in that matchup. I think a lot of the time you're going to be choosing between that and something like Crown of Providence, depending on the matchup. But like your power cards are good. Cards like Surgical Extraction, like that card is powerful. Like you do get to take a card from your opponent's hand as well. Like that is effectively, it's a 2 for 4, but you are representing taking a card from your opponent's hand. And if you're hitting that on a first chain and then you're contracting, you could be pulling apart their hand. Eradicate, milling a lot of the top cards and hitting multiple contract effects on the turn. That's really good.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because we've already done our lore section for this week's episode, can we get into our finance section with Surgical Extraction?
I don't know what's going on, to be honest. You're asking the wrong person. Yeah. It doesn't look like anything short printed. It just looks like there was some discourse. Some people took advantage of that with buyouts, and people want to play Arachne because it's Assassin's newest class in the game. So you look at the average price of Majestics, I think they are above a lot of the other classes, and it makes sense. People want to play this and get their hands on it. So I think it's going to go down. If you can wait.
Take me 10,000 feet, Hayden. Is Arachne something you could see yourself playing in the upcoming ProQuest season? Do you think that it's competitive? Do you think it's figured out? Do you think it's potentially solved? Or what's your sort of high level view of the hero right now?
Good question. Definitely not solved. But even if it gets solved, I would say probably not, because I think getting solved means it's just going to be a solid deck. I can't see this being... We don't really talk about tier lists, right? It's not really our thing. But we just look at the meta, and the meta is always dynamic and shifting. but I can't see this being quote unquote tier 1. I can see this being a meta pick that runs really well into specific decks, and the way it reminds me a little bit of like why you would run Lexi in previous formats. It's like, okay, I want to target a certain thing. I want to play Ice Lexi. It's like, yeah, I want to play Arachne because of XYZ. But the card pool's shallow. The hero ability really requires you to know a lot about what's happening in the meta you're playing into, I think. So personally, I can't see myself playing the ProQuest season. Although I've played Levia in a ProQuest before, so maybe, but but I think from where we are right now, I think until we get a bit more support further down the line, yeah, I think it's a bit less. We could very well have the next droppable set though have the assassin class in it. Like I wouldn't be surprised, right? And all of a sudden it's like, okay, we get a lot more support. It's a talented assassin, maybe.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah,
as well.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Anything else you want to say on assassin to end? Oh, I have a question for you. Is Regicide ever going to be relevant?
I was going to ask you that question.
Oh damn. Okay, well, I can answer if you like.
Yeah, I think the answer is no, but
it's probably not.
Probably not. Depends how good Crown of. Oh my
Dominia.
goodness, what is it called? Dominia is that
Well,
it?
I think
Is
the
it
Emperor's
Dominia?
pretty reasonable on Blitz. So, Regicide.
Dude, you
might
can't
be-
say that. I said the Emperor is trash. You gotta
I-
side with me.
No, I've got to go against you. That's how this dynamic works between us. Do you know? 85 episodes in, I think everyone knows that. That's why we always
Is it actually
race to
good?
try and
Is the-
grab the
is the
ground
Emperor
first.
Is the Emperor good in Blitz? Can it beat Icelander?
I don't know, but I think it's pretty powerful. Like, put it this way, right? Yeah, you start on 15 life. I think that's for a reason. You get access to being able to do a lot of like go-to warrior stuff. You can play like Iron Song Response in your deck. You can play Jubil, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, here's some reach with some burn at the end. Like, I think it is, but we'll see. Only thing I want to talk about it just quickly with Assassin to end off is like one of the power pieces of Assassin as well is the reaction phase. You get to play a deck that plays back into the reaction phase, similar to how Dorinthia has played in the past. Shred, cut to the chase. You play probably Razor Reflex in these decks. That's powerful. There's some cool stuff you can do there. It's going to allow you to have these spike turns, and if you can multiple contract turns, it's good. Especially if you're getting some on-hit effects like taking one of the cards from the Surgical Extraction, banishing a bunch of cards with Eradicate. Like there is stuff. There's a reason Eradicate's yellow. If you get to second cycle in some magical Christmas land, like Eradicate's going to do some friggin' work for you.
Yeah. I've heard of some magical Christmas lands with that. I'm interested in digging into the deck myself. I do think that I might be playing Wizard because I'm a casual now. And Wizard's freaking awesome. In the upcoming Pro Quest season, Hayden, is there anything you want to say? Because I do have sort of a somewhat closing question for you here about Dynasty.
Oh, I have a non-Dynasty related question for you actually. So why don't you go first? I don't have much to say other than set looks really cool. If I was to wrap up Dynasty a little bit with, I think I've talked about this already. I'd probably give this like an 8.59. I think the set is really, really, really cool. I think the big question I have, and I'm not going to ask this to you, Brent, it's just the question I have. I'm going to throw it out there to the listeners, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Is Dynasty enough to shake up the kind of the established meta we have with things like Icelander, Ultim, Briar, Fi? Like, is it? Are we going to see changes? Is Brute on the table? Is Katsu Crushing Tiger on the table? Is Assassin actually going to have an impact? All these questions are more like, what are your thoughts? Leave them for us in the comments. Let us know what you think. Not my question for you, Brennan. Hit your question, then I've got a question for you.
And while you're gallivanting down there in the comments, go ahead and hit us with a like and subscribe on YouTube. No, I'm kidding.
Nice.
Sorry, yeah. I kind of blacked out there for a sec. I'm back. Just want to ask you. You can totally be as biased as possible here. Which class do you think is the biggest winner from Dynasty, and what are you the most excited about? Go.
Yeah. So this would probably fall into this question. I think Mech's the biggest winner from Dynasty. I think Hanabi Blaster is really, really powerful. I think it's almost has this insurance of being able to help you stop the fatigue problems that Boost Dash has had in the past. Plus, just Hyperdrive. I've always really liked Hyperdriver, and now to have cards like Crankshaft and Jumpstart that make that card a lot more viable. Like, I thought Hyperdrive was almost playable before in Boost Dash, and I was playing it in Blitz Boost Dash even. Now it's actually super relevant. So I think it's Mech. Was that was your question, right? Which class?
Yeah.
I could be biased and say Brute.
Two,
like, Brute gets some upgrades, but
also it's like what were you most excited for? So it could be the one that I guess didn't get the biggest win, right?
Yeah, the one I'm most excited for is probably Ranger, to be honest.
Okay.
Sandscale Great Bow and aim counters are, I think, are really, really cool. I think Azalea was playable before, and now I think Azalea is like more playable. Is it gonna be winning ProQuest? Probably not, but is it going to win some ProQuest? Yeah, it'd probably win one or two.
Yeah, I'll interpret that as S tier. Yeah, for me, it's it obviously very biased, and there's not a lot of entertainment value with this answer. But it's Wizard. Like Wizard did get, I mean, Kano got a lot of tools here, a lot to work with. We talked about sort of the additional archetypes in Kano, but honestly, this set could have came out with just Swell Tidings, and I would have been a happy camper. Like, it doesn't take a lot for me. I'm used to being pretty abused by Legendary Studios when it comes to playing Kano, and that being my favorite hero. Yeah, but this is a great set. This is a great set for Wizard. The 0 for 3s, 0 for 1 at blue. Really, really good, especially the decks that we like to play. So I'm really excited. I don't think I'll be brainstorm comboing people. Did a little mental run through with that with Sasha the other day, and couldn't crack it in the 5 minutes we dedicated to it. But yeah, I'm really happy with the stuff that Kano got. It's exciting.
Yep. I think if you go back and listen to our Everfest episode and you listen to these 2 episodes, there's a bit of a tonal change in the way we've talked about the set, and
and now we're going to talk about Potion of... Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason we skipped over most of the generics in that set. Look, yeah, really happy with Uprising. Really excited to get in and play it, both Blitz and Classic Constructed. I'm looking a lot more forward to Classic Constructed. I'm actually, like I said, I'm wanting to play some Armories like this month and next month because I want to play with this set. I haven't really felt like that as much outside of competitive play, but I really want to just be playing Dynasty, so that's cool. I did have a question for you. I'm actually going to defer that question because I think we're probably going to talk about organized play in a future episode once we get more information about what's happening in early 2023, and that's a question for then. So I'm going to go ahead and sign it off. But first, Brendan, fitness challenge. Just give the quick spiel on how you can get involved with the marathon.
Yeah, so it's on February 19th in Austin, Texas. Highly recommend you get involved. We'll have a bunch of other content creators coming on over the weeks. We're giving you a lot of notice right now. It's a marathon. It's hard to do. There's also half marathon 5K available, but these are things that you have to train for and you have to work for. So that's why we're giving you so much notice, and we haven't really ramped up, all the giveaways and the sponsors and the other content creators. That's all coming, but if you're interested in going, get to work now and make sure you're prepared to come do whatever you want to do. It's a chance to meet us all in person, right? And do one of these things together. The Fab Fitness Challenge the first time around was a great event. We had tons of interaction on Twitter. Well, this is the same thing essentially, but now we get to meet in person and have a good time on the weekend. So check it out, February 19th, Austin Marathon. Hope to see you there. And yeah, that's it for me, Hayden.
Cool. Gonna sign off. You can find us on Twitter at BrendanAPG, at Fian_Dale. If you are on YouTube, please do drop a like and a comment. Let us know what you think about Dynasty. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the question I posed, which is Dynasty going to shake up this, or is it maybe me and Brendan are a little bit overzealous? Let us know your thoughts. We do also have some new videos that have gone up on the YouTube channel, and we do have this gameplay series that is over on fabtcg.com and their YouTube channel. Go check it out. Go throw us a support there if you don't mind. We really appreciate it. And just want to give a big shout out to everyone who got us over the 5K subs. I think we're at like 5.1K on YouTube subs now, or closing in on it. So the support's been, we just massive thank you.
Yeah, I think that's because everybody's heard about this upcoming Wizard video that Mr. Hayden Dale was supposed to put out. I've been waiting for it. Where is it, Hayden?
Yeah, I will be doing more content coming as we head towards the end of the year. Just getting back from Worlds has been very, very busy, but I will be putting some stuff up for sure. All right, Brendan, until next time, we'll see everyone in the next episode.